So a couple of points, and then I'll open to some questions. So the noticing that the mind has wandered and the awareness returning, I would say, especially if you're newer to this practice, this can be a really helpful place to be curious about. The moment when we notice that we've been thinking, that moment, mindfulness is already back. It was a moment of mindfulness that happened. You did not have to do that moment of mindfulness. It happened. So if we can be curious about that experience of awareness returning, there's several things that are valuable there. One is that it is effortless. We can begin to get a sense of how light it can be to be aware. Like, it happened. Like, it was a free moment of awareness. We didn't have to work for that one. So there it is. Awareness is back. And if we orient to some curiosity about that moment, what's it like? There's that piece of it, that it's just effortless. But it also is a pointer to the experience of being aware. Because in that moment, there can be, if you're not jumping on immediately and judging yourself for having been lost. And what I'd propose is this curiosity about this moment can help the mind to not be so reactive to that. At one point, I was just getting really curious about this. Like, what is it like when mindfulness returns? And so it's like, it did not matter how many times the mind wandered during a meditation. It could wander 150 times. And that gave me 150 opportunities to see what it was like for awareness to return and experience that moment of effortless mindfulness. So that itself can help to kind of cut the judgment around the return of mindfulness. So that's a kind of a great point about this curiosity about being aware of mindfulness returning, is that it helps to reduce the judgment there. So that moment of mindfulness returning, if you're aware as it returns, or it's just kind of aware as the mindfulness comes back, there can be a lingering kind of sense of what it was like in the moments before when mindfulness was lost. It's like we're not exactly aware of the not being aware. But the moment that mindfulness returns, there's this kind of lingering memory of what it was like, the kind of confusion or the kind of fogginess or caughtness of the mind. And this moment now of the kind of sense of what maybe feels like a clarity of experience or a recognition, awareness. So this moment of noticing that mindfulness returning can be one of the best ways to begin to get familiar with what the experience of awareness is like, because there's a contrast between being lost and being aware. And so that moment is a great moment to have some curiosity about and have that sense of like, well, what is it like to be aware now? And then another piece of that moment of returning, there's so much to see here. Like, I cannot emphasize this enough. It's like a great moment, this moment that mindfulness returns. That moment also, because the mind has gone into something, it's kind of been a habitual kind of thing, we also get to see in the moment that mindfulness returns how the mind has been shaped by what has been happening. So that may be that the mind has gone into some, argument with a partner or a memory about something or a worry about the future. And so in the waking up, then we may feel the kind of remnants of that. And it often feels more than remnants, it feels pretty powerful. So that's really useful to touch into, because if we are kind of jumping over it to say, well, I should come back to something like the breath or something, then those remnants can, not being seen, essentially take over. And so that moment of noticing mindfulness, returning to notice, oh, what's happening is the mind has been caught by this worry. Okay, well, worry is what's happening. So it allows us to start to see some of the effects of our habits of mind in that moment. And then another great thing about that moment is that more often than you might think, the mind simply drifts out of the present moment. It doesn't go charging out of the present moment. It just kind of forgets about mindfulness, and it just like wafts out, it just floats out of the present moment. And when we become aware of that, again, there can be this kind of attitude of almost jerking the mind back to the present moment. But what I've seen more than I would have expected, when I began to recognize, oh, the mind was just drifting, that when I noticed that quality, so the mind has been drifting, it hasn't been engaged in much, it hasn't been arguing with anybody, it's just been drifting. That actually is an experience of relaxation or ease. Way more often than I would have thought, when I come back from the mind wandering, the mind is more at ease than it was before it wandered. This is another little carrot for watching this moment, because it's quite lovely to come back from the mind wandering and notice that spaciousness, that calm, that ease, and again, the knowing of it. So one way to interpret this, I'm not sure, what it can be different why this happens for different people. Sometimes it's just habit that the mind wanders out. For me, sometimes it felt like it happened because I was working so hard. I was trying so hard. I was over efforting. And the mind basically said, you're trying too hard. I'll show you how to relax. And the only way it knew how to do that was to space out. And so when I woke up, it's like, oh, this is more relaxed. This is more easeful. So then I could notice what it was like to have an easeful mind while aware. I could notice what it was like to be spacious and easeful. And that quality of drifting, drifting we often associate with non-mindfulness, but that quality of drifting, we can know it, and it is quality of spaciousness. So that too, we can see, again, the effect of the wandering mind, noticing that when you return from wandering. It may be actually that there's more ease and more spaciousness that's available to connect with. And then I'd say that this exploration around noticing mindfulness returning, this instruction also is one of the keys for bringing this practice into daily life. Because we often get lost, we get involved in our content, but mindfulness returns way more than we would expect. And what often happens in that moment that mindfulness returns in daily life is that because we're not oriented around noticing moments of awareness when they happen, and we're oriented around instead the content of what's going on, what happens when mindfulness returns is that we almost immediately get submerged into the content. And so having this kind of intention, what I'd like to suggest for daily life practice is to just try to remember the intention to notice the moments when mindfulness returns. At first it'll be kind of sporadic, but as you begin to notice those moments, and again, this light touch of just like, oh, now I'm aware. What is it like to be aware now as I'm walking across the street, or reaching for something in the grocery store, or talking to the cashier, or driving down the road? What is it like awareness has arisen. What is it like to be aware? And again, just get on with your day, especially if you're driving the car, just get on with your day. The mindfulness may just continue with you, but you don't have to try to hold on to the mindfulness. That's the place where I think we often in our daily lives give up on the practice, because it's very challenging to hold on to mindfulness while we're engaged in some kind of activity that requires us to be with content. It's not impossible. It's absolutely possible to have mindfulness be there while we're doing anything, including intense analytical tasks, including conversation, including driving. But what's challenging is to try to do the mindfulness in those situations, to try to say, I'm going to be mindful while I'm doing my taxes, that kind of activity the doing of it kind of interrupts the flow of whatever content or process or analysis or that we're involved in. And so while it is possible for mindfulness to gain the momentum to be there with those intensive mental activities, it can take time. And so what I often say for daily life practice is start with the moments of mindfulness returning and just notice what it's like for mindfulness to arise while you're doing your taxes in that moment. What's there in that moment? And then, there may be a little bit of lingering momentum of that, but then just get on with your day. Do what you need to do. The more you emphasize recognizing those moments of mindfulness returning, the more they start to point themselves out to you. And there's a lot of them. There are a lot of them, and that will begin to create a little bit of a thread of mindfulness through your day. And then the other piece for daily life I'd encourage is that there are definitely times in daily life where we're not so mentally engaged. It's like, there are activities that we do that don't require intensive mental work, like washing the dishes or doing our morning routine, something like that. During those times, if mindfulness returns, you can do a little bit more prompting there, a little bit more kind of seeing if you can, like in the sitting practice, noticing, oh, here I am brushing my teeth. What's the experience? What's the relationship to the experience? Oh, impatience, wanting to get on with this. So in certain times of the day, you can explore a little bit more of that prompting of the awareness using some of those questions. Am I aware? What's obvious? What's the attitude? And we'll talk more about ways to practice with this in daily life as we go. I'm going to take some time. There's only about 10 minutes left, just a little bit of time for questions. And the majority of the time for this afternoon will be for questions. So, but are there any questions right now? And remember to use your Zoom hand if you want to raise your hand. Let's see, type something into the chat. There was a question right before the guided. You are using mindfulness and awareness interchangeably. Yes, I am using mindfulness and awareness interchangeably. When I reflect on what is the experience, sometimes I become concerned that I'm being pulled much into thought or thinking versus just trusting wisdom to arise when it's ready. So the practice isn't so much about reflecting on what is happening. The questions can feel like that. It's sometimes the questions can hook into our tendency to think. And if that happens for you, I would say you don't need to use the questions. Just notice. The noticing is what's important. Noticing, are you aware? Noticing what's here. The noticing is what we're doing here, not thinking about what's here. So that Let me see if there's any further. When I reflect on what is the experience, I become concerned that I'm being pulled too much into thought. So if you are noticing that, you start with the noticing, oh, what's happening? So you notice a sensation, a body sensation, and then it's like, oh, this is what I'm experiencing. The mind is kind of thinking about that. Then just notice that that's thinking, or just let it go. If that feels like it would just pull you into more thinking, just let it go. Just that's not the emphasis of this practice. It is the noticing that is the emphasis of the practice. And another question in the chat. Is it correct we're trying to say we're trying to become conscious of effortless ongoing awareness? So become aware of awareness that's already here. Well, I would say that is what tends to happen over time. We become aware of effortless ongoing awareness over time. Initially, we do, and that's what I was pointing to in the daily life piece, particularly noticing the arising of the moment of awareness returning. That's the effortless moment of awareness. And then there can be a little bit of effortless ongoing awareness that follows that. In the formal practice, I would say that momentum, what the being aware of effortless ongoing awareness is the momentum of mindfulness. That happens over time. And it does require some degree of effort. The light touch of effort that I was talking about is the work that we do. The first instruction Sayadaw U Tejaniya gave me when I went to practice with him is the only work to give your mind is to remind yourself to be aware. That's the basics of the effort here, is just aware or noticing. It may not even be reminding. It may be just noticing that I am aware, and then noticing that I am aware again. that noticing that I'm aware, and then what is obvious with that awareness, and then in the next moment just lightly reconnecting. Still aware, still aware. We can use the questions aware, that's a question in the mind, aware of what, as subtle prompts in the mind to help the mind kind of get that momentum of mindfulness. Or if the questions pull you into thinking, then just that, it could almost just be like almost a nod to the experience, like a mental kind of like that, this, without even using the words, just connecting. So there's a little bit of effort that we need to make in our formal practice. And as I was suggesting, in daily life, find those times where you can make that little bit of effort in some familiar activities that don't require that much thought, like preparing breakfast or brushing your teeth. There's enough kind of familiarity with those activities that we don't need to be analyzing what's the next thing I need to do. We can just notice that we're moving, notice what's happening there. So
hold on.
Oh, hang on. Charles Lee, you are unmuted. I thought I had. I'll mute everybody again. Okay. So that momentum of mindfulness builds with that light touch of effort. And then we do begin recognizing that ongoing effortless mindfulness. That is an important part of kind of the maturing of this practice, is when we begin to recognize that mindfulness is here, and we know that mindfulness is here. Let's see. There's another question in the chat, I think. How does awareness differ from seeing and hearing? Does awareness include emotions? So we can be aware of seeing happening. We can be aware of hearing happening. So seeing is, noticing seeing happening, there is awareness happening. Noticing hearing going on, there is awareness happening. Those are just fields, we could say, or areas where awareness can meet experience. Within the field of seeing, within the field of hearing, there's the field of body sensation we can be aware of physical sensations. There's the field of smell. All 5 physical senses can be a field of awareness, as well as what's going on in our mind. So yes, awareness includes being aware of what's going on in our mind, including emotions, including thoughts. In the Buddhist psychology, emotions are considered mental. We think of them more as heart, perhaps more as body heart. And we can notice aspects of the physical experience of emotions, how it affects the body, but also something of how it's affecting the mind. And emotions are a big part of what we can notice and see. And it's important to recognize them because they are powerful shapers of our experience. They tend to influence how we relate to experience. So we notice all aspects of our experience. Awareness is the receptor, the receiver for whatever is happening in our experience.